Why are you not well-spoken? The reason is you're treating the symptoms but ignoring the deeper root causes. I understand these causes because I had to confront them myself. I'm Celeste, and over the past 2 years, I've been sharpening my speaking skills. I've been reading books, studying history's greatest speakers, and creating this podcast, A Better Way to Say. If you give me your attention for this episode, you'll leave with a clear understanding of what's holding you back and actionable strategies to change that. Because I want this to be an episode that you apply to your life, not just listen to and forget about. With that, let's begin. If you're like me, you have this goal of becoming eloquent, of speaking well, and not just when you have pre-prepared remarks, but off the cuff, whenever. Well, you might make the mistake that I made initially, and that was approaching speaking from the wrong way around. Let me explain. You might approach this thinking of your speech, your output. If I want to say things in a better way, then I need to practice and focus on using powerful words and not saying and and all these communication tips and tricks that have their place, but ultimately are not starting at a deep enough level to affect real change in the way that you communicate. The problem is that starting with speech is starting too high up the chain. I want you to picture a flower. Really see one singular flower blossoming out of the ground. Picture it in your mind's eye. The blossom that you admire, the visible part, that's your everyday speech. But beneath it, everything that's allowed that flower to blossom, those are the influences of your speech. So these are the beliefs you have about your speaking abilities. These are the pieces of content you do or do not consume. These are even the habits you've developed around speech over time. So in this episode, we're going to unearth that soil a little bit and understand what goes into making you articulate. I'm going to explain 4 reasons why you don't sound articulate. And for each one, we're going to study what a great speaker from history has done to address this issue. And I'll also give you an action item for every lesson so that you can apply it in your own life. Now, each lesson is going to go deeper. It's going to demand more of you. But if you stick with it and you actually follow through on the action items, you will see a difference in the way that you're able to speak. And I'm excited for you to experience that transformation. So let's get into the lessons. And as you listen, take note of which ones you really notice apply to you, because that's going to influence how you proceed on your own journey to being articulate. I have my notes here, so if you see me looking to the side, that's why. But let's start with reason number 1 that you don't sound articulate, and that is that you consume more than you contemplate. The definition of articulate reads, expressing oneself readily, clearly, and effectively. You say you want to possess this power, but answer this. How often on a daily basis are you consuming content? Videos, reels, emails, texts, all of that. And then on the opposite end of the spectrum, how often are you contemplating, sitting alone with your thoughts, giving your mind space to work through all the ideas and the content that you've consumed that day? If you're picturing this as a pie chart, for most of us, it's going to be much more heavily the consuming content. A very small portion will be the contemplating, the reflecting, the introspection part. And therein lies one issue, the first reason that you're not articulate. Because thoughts lie at the base of your speech. So if you want to speak clearly, you have to be able to first think clearly. I was recently reading this essay. You see it? Politics and the English Language by George Orwell. And in it, he talks about how there's a direct line between a lack of clarity in thought and a lack of clarity in the writing of someone. So he brings up all these examples of writers who are writing in these vague and unclear ways. And he has this disdain for unclear language because he says it can be used to mislead people and to stir up discontent, which is true. But the reason it stuck out to me was this line is so true. It's that if you cannot process your thoughts, then there's no way you're going to be able to accurately convey them to someone else. Orwell has this quote in the essay, a writer either has a meaning and cannot express it, or he inadvertently says something else, or he is almost indifferent as to whether his words mean anything or not. I can almost feel Orwell's disdain for unclear language radiating off the page when I read that, because he understands that our language shapes our reality. So if you find yourself stumbling over your words or having vague language or just facing this general inability to form a cohesive thought without a lot of work, without kind of struggling through, then you need to take this next action item, this first step toward becoming more articulate. The practice that you need to adopt is contemplation. It's what Aristotle called the highest form of human activity. Now, I love studying the ancient Greeks and learning about the way that they viewed the world and how Aristotle laid the foundations of Western philosophy. And one of the noteworthy practices that he followed with his students in the Lyceum, which was a school that he founded, was to go on long walks. And he would walk with his students and speak with them, and they would explore ideas on these long walks. And this act of contemplating while moving was said to help stimulate the students and allow them to go deeper into a thought. Now, I'm not suggesting you go on a 2-hour-long walk. I know that we have to think practically when we're talking about how to become more articulate, but my action item for you is to set aside a daily practice of contemplation. So this can look like going on a walk without any distractions, no phone, no music, just you and yourself and a clear idea that you want to explore. Or this can be journaling and the act of putting pen to paper and following an idea through. And this can actually be transformative for the way that you are then able to articulate yourself. And I'll give you one example that stood out to me when I realized, wow, journaling not only deepens my understanding of myself, but also the way that I'm able to speak with others. So earlier this year, I celebrated my birthday, and the night before my birthday, I had written this journal entry exploring the idea of getting older and what it felt like to turn this new age. I followed that one idea through, so I explored different aspects of it, and I simply wrote. I wrote, but I focused only on one idea, and I had the constraint of let's just follow this idea through to the end. The next day on my actual birthday, I was out to brunch with a friend, and he asked me, so what does it feel like to be this new age? And I had this wealth of clear, coherent thoughts I could draw from, and I just shared one with him, one that I had been able to journal about the night before. And at the end of me sharing it, he said, wow, that's a very deep answer, and it made him think about aging as well. And I share that because in that moment, I realized had I not written or contemplated or spent time alone with my thoughts, I wouldn't have been able to give an answer that resonated so deeply with my friend and allowed us to enjoy that moment in a more deep way. So the moral of the story, I suppose, is you can find out things about yourself via contemplation, but also it will allow you to articulate that more with other people and find that deeper connection. So action item number 1 is to set aside a practice of contemplation. It could be 20 minutes a day, it could be 10, but it needs to be a time when you're free of any external distractions and you're simply focusing on the thoughts you already have in your mind and working through some of them. If this sounds daunting, or if you want more of a structure for this, linked in the description below, I do have a guide. It's called Eloquence Unlocked, and I have a note on daily and weekly practices that you can do to sound more eloquent. So if you're wondering where to start or how to structure this in your own life, start there. The link is in the show notes. As you contemplate more consistently, you'll find you have clarity and can speak on ideas more freely off the cuff. And that, of course, is the purpose of becoming more eloquent, is to be able to speak your mind when and where you want, not only when you're quote unquote prepared. But this contemplative state is only the first step toward becoming well-spoken. And without its counterpart, it's not that helpful to us. This brings me to reason number 2 that you're not articulate. This is that you stay in the realm of education and never move into execution. Listen up. You will never be articulate if you don't practice speaking. Earth-shattering, I know. But even though it sounds simple and you may be thinking, I speak all the time, I'm a certified yapper, I talk. No, what I mean is you need to be putting yourself in situations where you're a bit uncomfortable, where you're stretching your limits and actually stepping into situations that test you with a slight amount of pressure. When was the last time you took a speaking opportunity that scared you a little bit? If you can't think of one, then that's an issue, because you can't exist solely in the state of contemplation. You have to act. Your thoughts matter and have impact when you give voice to them. So always remember that we are cultivating this speaking skill for a purpose. And one lesson that helps this stick in my mind has been going back to the ancients, especially the ancient Romans. The Romans had a different idea than the Greeks. The Greeks really championed contemplation. And like I said, Aristotle believed it was the highest form of human activity. But the Romans had this idea of the active life. Cicero was one of Rome's greatest speakers, and he had this moving way of speaking that eventually became the blueprint for a lot of Western rhetoric. He wrote, "Nor is it sufficient to possess this virtue as if it were some kind of art, unless we put it in practice. An art, indeed, though not exercise, may still be retained in knowledge, but virtue consists wholly in its proper use and action." He's saying that possessing knowledge or possessing a skill is one thing, but putting it into practice, that's what's actually virtuous. And virtuous was this idea of aiming at the good. This is a reminder to move past the contemplation stage and into the active role of speaking, specifically speaking when you're slightly unprepared, speaking when you weren't planning to, speaking in a way that will stretch you slightly. Think of your flower. It needs light to grow, and stepping into an impromptu speech is that light. You need to step into the light. I have one example of something that made me uncomfortable, but I'm so glad I did it. And that was going to a Toastmasters meeting. So if you're familiar with Toastmasters, it's a group that teaches you how to become a more proficient public speaker. And I went into the group. I had never been before. I didn't know if I would be speaking or just observing, but I was called on to speak. And they basically told me, 2 minutes on the clock, we give you a prompt and you speak in front of this room. So 25 faces trained on me. They gave me a prompt. And it was, what would you tell your younger self about who you are now? And then they gave me the mic and I had to speak for 2 minutes. And I could feel myself tensing up slightly before I took a deep breath and was able to speak. And I saw people's faces moving along with mine as I shared my emotions and shared slivers of my past self with them. Ultimately, I'm glad I did it. It was only slightly uncomfortable, but it was a reminder to myself that I can do uncomfortable things. And that's sometimes the reminder we need when we think of moving from just contemplating and thinking and learning about speaking to actually doing it. So I encourage you, the next time that you have an opportunity, whether it's to speak up and ask a question in a meeting, or to give a toast somewhere, or to encourage someone else to speak by being the first one to say something. Wherever you find a moment where you feel this hesitancy, this, oh, I don't know if I want to say something, that's the exact moment that you should step into the light and speak. So that is your action item number 2, say yes to speaking opportunities. And if you're scared to speak on the spot, I have the Eloquence Unlocked worksheet, which is in the show notes for you. So in that, I have 5 principles of clear and eloquent speech, and it's in a list, so you can easily screenshot it and just come back to that for a reminder of the principles that can guide you as you're speaking. But ultimately, what's going to be the most helpful is just getting out and speaking. So I encourage you to do that. Reason number 3 that you don't sound articulate is you don't have a strong enough why. You say you want to become articulate. Would you shave half of your head to do it? That's how badly a young man in Greece wanted to become a great speaker. His name was Demosthenes, and he became one of the most well-known and well-revered speakers in ancient Greece. But the reason, his origin story, is so striking that now I understand why he shaved half of his head. So essentially, he lost his father when he was 6, and his inheritance was squandered by these guardians that were meant to take care of him. So when he came of age, he realized that he would have to defend himself to the court in order to gain back his inheritance. That meant becoming a great public speaker, becoming persuasive, being able to speak to his cohort and have them take his side in a court of law. So he knew he had to dedicate himself deeply to this because his livelihood depended on it. And legend has it that he shaved half of his head so that he looked too ridiculous to go out in public, and he studied in this underground cavern until he became a very skilled and persuasive orator. Now, obviously, this is a riveting origin story, and maybe you don't have a similar one. I certainly don't, but we all do have reasons why we want to be better speakers, though often we don't clarify that reason to ourselves. And once we do, something clicks. You realize this is a deeper goal than a superficial, I want to sound smarter, or I just want people to think I'm clever. So your action item is to define your why. Ask yourself, why do I want to become a better speaker? and visualize how this would impact and change your life. For me, the idea that the limits of my language define the limits of my world is an idea that reverberates in my mind often, because I realize the power that I have to expand my ability to connect with others simply by cultivating this skill of eloquence. And that's why improving my speech matters to me. I want to expand my world, to have the vocabulary, to have the skill and the structure to convey what I'm feeling and also more deeply understand what others are. And at the root is human connection. I suppose that's what drives a lot of my desire to become a better speaker, is to deepen the connections. Even like in the story I shared earlier, the way that I was able to articulate what it was like to get 1 year older, and then my friend was able to share his perspective on that. It was a small moment on one day, but it impacted both of us. And truly, I think that's what becoming eloquent can be. It can be leaning in and almost having the paintbrushes to be able to paint your thoughts to someone else, and then the structure and the ability to see what they're painting for you as well. So that's part of why I want to become a better speaker and what's driven my eloquence journey. But I would love to hear from you in the comments. Let me know what drives you to become a better speaker and why you care so deeply about becoming eloquent. Because everyone who listens to A Better Way to Say has a reason, and I would love to know yours. Now for the lesson that altered the way I speak for the better and can for you as well. I will warn you, it's the most uncomfortable, but it's so worth it. And the lesson is, your communication environment is weak. You want to be well-spoken, so ask yourself, does the content I consume support or hinder that goal? Because here's the truth, you won't sound superb with average inputs. If you consume like everyone else, you'll, unsurprisingly, sound like everyone else. And the problem I've encountered in my own life, and I'm sure this resonates with you, is that it's so easy to mindlessly consume. You can open up your phone and be distracted for hours. You can flip through emails, text. What's more difficult, but what's incredibly worth it, is creating a communication environment that you choose. So you're not just opening your mind to anything. You're specifically creating almost this content world, this environment that you pick, and it's all serving the goal of helping you become a better communicator. So if most of the content you consume isn't supporting this goal, if it's kind of mindless, if it just pops up onto your feed, if you don't have a dedicated structured practice around, oh, I listen to this podcast because I love the way they speak, or I only follow these people because they speak in a way that I want to speak like. If you're not surrounding yourself with positive influences, then any influence can come in. But the beautiful thing and the good news is that you can flip that. You can create an environment that supports your goals of becoming a better speaker. Multiple speakers from the past have done this, have understood that if you want to sound unique and if you want to sound persuasive and powerful, then you need to learn from others who sound that way first, and then you can create your own voice. One example is Winston Churchill, who famously roused a nation in a time of great peril during World War II and went on to win the Nobel Prize for literature, but also for his great speaking. Churchill grew up without any special knack for speaking, but his father was a politician, and he would come with his father to work and listen to these speeches in Parliament. And almost by osmosis, he was taking in what it took to be an excellent speaker. And he would reread these speeches and he would listen to them, not just when he was there with his father, but as a man as well. Over time, he was able to cultivate his own speaking style and become this persuasive and eloquent speaker. And the beauty for us is we live in a time where we can access such a wealth of superb speaking. You can listen to professors, you can listen to scientists, you can listen to politicians who you admire, you can listen to authors who you admire. You can access really anyone from the past until now, but we don't always take advantage of this. I understand there's so much out there, and that can present a problem because, well, how do you weave listening to great communicators in your life without it becoming overwhelming? You also have a life to live. There is a way to do it, a manageable way that fits into your life and makes you a better speaker. It's called building your edifying environment. And it's what I'm covering in the next episode. So if you're curious about how to build that environment, give the next episode a listen. And if you want to continue improving your speaking skills, then join the Better Way to Say newsletter. Both of the links are in the show notes for you. Thanks for listening to A Better Way to Say. And until next time, speak well.